Happy Monday, Tuesday, everybody. Hope you had a really good weekend. We're going to do a double lecture this week. And so for the Monday, Tuesday class, we're going to be covering Chapter 17, Lessons 1, 2, and 3. And then for our Wednesday, Thursday class, we'll cover Lessons 4 and 5. So we've got a lot to get through. Um, on the slide in front of you, you can see that we're going to be doing an overview of lessons 1 and 2, the politics of the 1920s and the growing economy, and we're also going to be diving deeper into the idea of the clash of values during this time period. So let's get going. We've got our politics of the 1920s, and I won't insult your intelligence. I know that you guys can read what you have there in front of you. We're looking at the Harding administration. He was a comforting sort of guy. He liked the idea. He actually ran using the platform of, we're going to return back to normal, everyone. And typically, when I say that, most of my students look at that and they say, okay, whatever. But man, can you understand how satisfying it would be to return to normal? I mean, uh, these people have been disrupted by World War One and the Spanish flu. Um, we're being disrupted, of course, too. It also meant turning away from progressivism, something that had been basically in the forefront of all the political ideology at this time with Wilson, Roosevelt, and Taft, right? But this new ideology is going to make an uneven distribution of wealth. Moving on to another idea that's in lesson 1 that I just couldn't skip by. I need to mention this to you. It's the international financial system that helped kind of jumpstart the economy of the 1920s. And I just want to spend a few moments covering this with you. We've got the International Financial Plan, where the United States is going to help bail out Germany so that Germany can make money to give to the Allies, and the Allies can pay the money back to us. On the surface of it, it looks like we spent $2.5 billion to get $2.6 billion back, but it's actually genius, all right? If you think of it this way, the US basically loaned, notice I use the term loaned, $2.5 billion to the Germans. And the Germans are able to basically jumpstart their economy, pay back the Allies or some of what they needed to pay in reparations, okay? And then we get this back. So we're actually getting money back from two different directions, 2.6 billion from the Allies, and we're actually making this money back too, all right? So pretty smart move on our part, all right? Us Americans, we're so amazing. All right, the next thing that we need to do is go over lesson 2, the growing economy. And this was a fun lesson to read, but it's not the stuff I want to focus on. So we're looking at what made the prosperity. It's sort of like a shallow kind of prosperity, based on consumer products and the boom of new industries and stuff. I mean, we're full of ourselves at this time period. We're making money hand over fist on the radio by selling advertisements. All right. Um, in the end, I think the most important thing for us to consider here is that one group that was left behind by this prosperity were the farmers. Right? Farmers were making a lot of money during World War One because the countries of Europe were devastated. I mean, most of their young people were off fighting. They couldn't grow food. And so we were making enough food to feed the United States and all of Europe and consuming pretty much everything that could come out of the ground in the United States. When we hit the 1920s, though, the Europeans start making more food, and they start, becoming more self-sufficient. And when they do that, the United States didn't stop producing as much as they were making, and we ended up having a really big oversupply of food. So if you have a high supply and a low demand, then you're going to have lower prices. So American farmers found themselves basically making too much and not being able to sell it. All right, so that takes us into lesson 3, the clash of values, sorry. And I want you to take a few moments, maybe take a pause right here. In fact, I think you really should. You should pause the video right now, and you should write down the big questions and your content vocabulary. All right? Pause. Okay, picking up from there, we're going to move into this idea of nativism. Nativism is this idea that only Native Americans are worthy of being American. And when I say Native Americans, I'm not talking about Native Americans, like Indians. I'm talking about white people who look like me. There were a lot of people in the United States that thought that the ratio of who was here was perfect. You don't want to mess it up by bringing in a lot of people that would be undesirable. So, nativism is the belief that one's native land must be protected from immigrants who might disrupt, might take jobs from native-born Americans, citizens. Has nothing to do with Native Americans like, Indians. So, to get a better idea of what this is about, we need to take a look at our next slide here. And this is the idea of restricting immigration. So, this chart right here is so much to look at here. So you might want to take a pause and really digest that. In a nutshell, I want you to take a look at the ratio of people coming into the United States way back in the time period after the Civil War. I'm talking about like the 1870s. In the 1870s, most of the people coming into the United States were either from Britain or Ireland or from Western Europe. So they would fit into that category of being someone like a German, a French guy, a British guy, an Irish guy, a Scotsman, somebody like that. And very, very few people were coming in from Southern Europe, from Eastern Europe, and Scandinavia. Scandinavians were still considered quite desirable people to come in, but the Eastern Europeans and the Southern Europeans were not, right? And that's because Southern Europeans were more than likely Catholic, and Eastern Europeans might be Jewish, or they might be Eastern Orthodox. They didn't fit into that idea of being a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant American. All right, so we decided that we would make some quota laws limiting the number of newcomers arriving. It didn't stop the Mexicans from coming north, but they're a different issue, a different factor. Okay, so moving on past that, to kind of put this in a little bit of a nutshell here, we've got the Sacco Vanzetti case, which is outlined in your textbook. We've got two guys here from Italy, Sacco and Vanzetti there. Sacco's got the nice big Mario mustache. And these two guys were basically pinned with the blame for a murder. There was like a shoe warehouse, and they had robbed the place, and they killed the foreman or the guard that was working there, right? The evidence behind these two guys was very slim. He had a gun, and it happened to have the same caliber bullet that was used to kill the foreman. Anyway, their cases basically run through the legal system at breakneck speed, and they end up being found guilty, and they are executed. We really don't have a lot of firm evidence that they were guilty, except for the fact that they are Italian, they're Catholic, they're anarchists, and we didn't like any of those. All right. Our next section here is the Ku Klux Klan, which begins in the South after the Civil War. Okay, it really returns with a vengeance during this time period, 1920s. And I want you to remember, the Ku Klux Klan isn't just anti-African American. All right, they're a hate group, but they spread their hate kind of wide. They were anti-Catholic, they were anti-Jewish, they were anti most immigrants, and they were definitely wanted to keep or subjugate African Americans living in the South, keep them into a subservient role. So, new laws limited immigration, but favored immigrants from certain areas like England or from Germany or France, right? And Mexican immigration increases. We don't have a firm number on that Mexican immigration because all you have to do is walk up, all right? Moving on, I've got a question here for you to consider. What were some of the perceived purposes the KKK served in post-World War I America? I love that question. It it asks you to think about why they existed. So many people have a hard time wrapping your head around why the KKK existed at all. And you have to think like an historian, really. Um, so there's some things there for you to consider. All right, so now we're going to get into an idea of morality, all right, and especially when it comes to gender. So I've got a picture here, and this picture, I'm telling you, this picture would get me fired if I was a teacher back in the 1920s. Okay, it's a picture of a woman. Okay, and that's an anticlimax, isn't it? Yeah. But for the 1920s, let me tell you what is so just like awful about this. You can see her legs. You can see a whole lot of legs, right? You can see all of her arms. I mean, this is scary stuff here. Okay, women have a new role in society and during this time period. All right, and I'm just going to move up my picture here to try to get around this. Traditionally, women were wives and homemakers, and they abided by a traditional dress that was very, very modest. To give you an idea of what I'm talking about here, this is a dress from the Victorian era. And I want you to notice it doesn't show any cleavage, it doesn't show arms, it doesn't show legs or ankles or anything like that, right? And now we have this new group of women that call themselves the flappers. And we can see arms and legs and ankles and oh my gosh, I mean this is really blowing a lot of people's minds. All right, they were very unconventional and they challenged society's expectations of what women could be or should be. All right, so before we wrap up here, we need to talk about our last little section here on prohibition. All right, so to start us off, I've got a little political cartoon here of Uncle Sam kicking the bottle out. Prohibition established in 1920. All right, we actually made a constitutional amendment. We changed the Constitution of the United States because we wanted to get rid of alcohol. The 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 amendment that gets rid of alcohol is the 18th Amendment, right? And not only did it get rid of alcohol, it created a whole bunch of other stuff, right? So that takes us into our section on prohibition and crime, all right? And I'm going to kind of go up and down this slide a little bit here because we need to understand where this is coming from. In 1919, the states ratified the 18th Amendment, and they forbade the manufacture, distribution, and sale of alcohol. In other words, it's totally legal to drink, but I don't know how you're going to get it, all right? You can't manufacture it, you can't distribute it, you can't sell it, all right? And in order to keep the alcohol from reaching people, they tried to enforce it, but they didn't do a very good job. They used this thing that's called the Volstead Act, which was a law established to enforce the amendment, but it was really, really, really weak, right? Not enough police and not enough federal forces were in place to help us combat this illegal activity that was going to surround um, prohibition, okay? So, like anything, if you make it illegal, you quickly get a black market, all right? Imagine if someone were to say, well, video games are illegal. Well, very quickly we'd have people, in back alleys and all sorts of places trying to, to produce things for people to illegally consume. This guy right here, his name is Al Capone. He was that famous mobster that developed an organized crime syndicate that became a real concern for everybody, okay? Americans still drank. The law was frequently violated. There were all sorts of issues when it comes to how police were enforcing it or not enforcing it. And it really kind of made us jaded because imagine this, you rely on the police to do their job in order to make society safe and in order to enforce laws. A lot of policemen were not enforcing these laws, right? So that gets us all the way to the end of lesson 3. we're done. Pay attention to the other things that are right next to this video.